These Violent Delights, Chapter 36. Roma's hands launched to his throat. Chapter 37. The madness would not have come so quickly upon ordinary victims, who received only one insect to begin the infection. One would turn to 10 over time, and 10 to 100, until enough had multiplied within the victim to take control. But Roma was receiving them all at once, and at once they were overriding his nerves, driving him to gouge for blood. Juliet furiously brushed the few stubborn insects off of her arms and steadied her grip on her pistol. There was only one way to save him, only one way to put a stop to all this. She ran up to the end of the wharf and searched for the monster, thinking of nothing except finding the blasted thing, and she should have paid more attention to the danger behind. Her head slammed onto the wooden boards of the wharf. "I really cannot let you do that, Juliet," Paul grunted. "Why don't we just—" Before Juliet could get her bearings, could even think to get back up and aim again, Paul kicked her hard in the stomach. Juliet fell off the main wharf, her whole body slamming onto the smaller platform below, which floated right above water. Her lungs rattled. With laborious effort, she tried to raise her weapon, tried to push past her spinning head, but then Paul jumped and landed on his feet beside her and kicked the gun out of her hands with a pitiful flop. "I'm sorry, Juliet." He grabbed a fistful of her hair and stuck her head into the water. Juliet nearly gasped, except opening her mouth meant swallowing the dirty river water, so she kept her lips pinched tightly together. She struggled to writhe out of Paul's grip, forcing herself to keep her eyes open, even as the water swirled with the horrendous black of swimming insects. Paul's grip was far stronger than his lanky frame would let on. His fingers upon her head were a steel claw. "This is for the best." Juliet could barely hear him, though he was kneeling by her side. Her ears were blocked with water, with merciless insects. "I don't want to hurt you, but you've given me no choice. I tried to save you, Juliet. I really tried." Juliet bucked and kicked harder and harder, to no avail. She should have shot Paul when she had the chance. He was not only trying to kill her now, but he was trying to kill her slowly, so she would die with the knowledge that Roma had been within saving. So she would die with the knowledge that she had failed. Roma was strong, but he couldn't stay in control forever. Perhaps he had succumbed, digging his fingers into his neck. Perhaps he had already died. Her struggling was useless. Paul's blue vial had saved her from a death to the madness. Now Paul had decided that she was to be discarded anyway, into a watery grave. The blue vial. Juliet suddenly remembered. Paul had another in his coat pocket. If he had a blue vial in there, then there was a chance that he kept another syringe too. Juliet reached her hand out, groping blindly for the edges of Paul's coat. It was almost laughable how easy she found it, how easily her hand shoved right into the wide opening of his pocket. Frantic, on the very last gasp of air in her lungs, Juliet pulled the syringe out and stabbed the needle into Paul's wrist. With a roar, Paul loosened his grip, his hand flexing in pain. Juliet sat up quickly, gasping for breath, barely pausing to get a hold of herself, barely pausing to glance up at the wharf and cry at the sight of Roma struggling against his own hands as they dug deeper into his throat. She was scrambling onto her knees, diving for Paul before he could secure his grip on his gun, tackling him down around the waist and pushing both of them into the water. The river hit her with a shock, but Juliet was the one in control now. Juliet was the one hovering above Paul as they sank deeper. One of her arms was still looped around his waist, the other firmly on his wrist, and as the foam around them cleared, as Paul's eyes snapped open to find Juliet hovering before him like some vengeful demigod, she plucked the gun from his hand. "No," his mouth formed. There was utter horror in his expression. "Juliet!" She kicked him in the chest. He flailed backward. She put both her hands around the gun, pointed to his forehead, and merely inches away, she pulled the trigger. The water muffled most of the sound. The water did not muffle the blood. Paul Dexter went into death with 3 eyes open, the third eye a weeping bullet wound. The water turned red, and Juliet surged up, coughing as she broke to the surface, her gaze wild as she searched for her next order of business. She found the monster immediately, for he had already returned upon the main wharf. Yet he was not quite a monster anymore. He was transforming back, the process incomplete. His face had returned, but the lower half of his body was still strange and changed in green, and as the old man knelt there, it seemed he had already given up. Juliet pulled herself into the smaller platform. Then, the pistol in her hands, she scrambled back into the wharf. "Ki Ren," she called. The unwilling monster of Shanghai turned to face her. The old man had a horror marring his tired features too, but a sort of difference to the one that had paralyzed Paul in his mid-moments. This was a horror at himself, at all had been made to do, and all he wanted to be rid of. He nodded at her. Juliet raised the pistol. Her hands were shaking. "I'm sorry," she said. Once again she pulled the trigger. The bullet struck his heart. The bullet was as loud as the bang at the end of the world. But Ki Ren's sigh was soft. His hands came up to his chest gingerly, as if the bullet were nothing but a heartfelt compliment. Rivulets of the red ran down his fingers and onto the wharf, tinting his surroundings a deep color. Juliet inched closer. Ki Ren had become still, but he did not pitch over. Something was happening inside him. Something was moving. A bulge appeared in his left wrist. Juliet watched it migrate from the veins amid the old man's forearm to the wiry space between his neck and shoulder. Suddenly his Adam's apple was the size of a true apple, pushing against him, capillary-filled skin. Ki Ren's throat split down the middle, just like that, as if a knife had slit him apart. The flaps of his skin burst open and detonated a mass of black-red blood. Ki Ren collapsed immediately. From his throat, an insect as big as Juliet's fist flew outward, detaching from the veins and tendons as it had been living off. Screeching, Juliet fired the pistol. Once, twice, 3 times. Her mind was panicking into overdrive, her most basic reflexes shaking violently. 2 of her bullets flew wide. One grazed the insect, sending it nose-diving into the wharf. For a moment, its circular, flat body scurried around the surface of the wooden panels for something, anything to hold on to. Dozens of tiny legs that resembled microscopic hairs scrambling to meet a body. Then the insect stilled, and then it stopped twitching it at last. So, too, did the other insects in the water. She could feel the change. It felt like the shroud of death had lifted off its city. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." She turned around slowly. She searched for life at the other end of the wharf. "Roma?" She was frightened that he would not respond, frightened that all that would be met with was silence. She was frightened that she would not find him at all, that he had been taken by waters that ran the city red. But then her eyes landed upon where he had placed himself, found him in a curled ball against a parked car in the middle of a wide, wide road. Slowly he lowered his hands from his throat. Blood trickled down his neck. She ran up to him, tossing the pistol away. She could hardly breathe even as her hands came upon his shoulders, gripped him hard to make sure he was real, that this was the truth before her and not a hallucination of the broken mind. "I'm okay," Roma assured, his voice quivering. He had nearly gotten there. 10 puncture marks dotted his neck, deep enough to leave red insides to show. But he was alive. Juliet pulled him to her fiercely, locking them in an embrace. "The monster is dead," she whispered. But why did she feel so empty? Why did it feel like their roles weren't over? "Did Paul hurt you?" Roma asked. He pulled away and ran his eyes over her to check for wounds, as if his own hands still weren't running with blood. Roma shook her head, and Roma sighed in relief. Juliet shook her head, and Roma sighed with relief. He glanced at the water where Paul's body floated in those gray-green waves. "He thought he loved you." "It wasn't love," Juliet whispered. Roma pressed a kiss to her temple, closing her eyes against the dampness that stuck to her hair. "Let's go," he said. "Let's go Lake Elisa."